Remember that movie where the 10 strangers went to an island, and then they all died one by one? And then it turned out they weren't strangers, that they all had a connection.
I do remember that movie, and today we're going to be talking about every different adaptation that I could find of Agatha Christie's novel And Then There Were None, aka 10 Little Indians, aka 10 Little
Nephews.
We're going to talk about that in a minute. By the end of the series, I'm hoping that you're going to have a working knowledge of what you're getting involved in and which productions would suit you best. We'll cover the important adaptations, as well as some of the crazier and more exotic work inspired by Christie's novel. I recently watched Murder on the Orient Express, the 2017 version. Loved it, and began going back and watching other versions of Express, Death on the Nile, the Poirots, the Miss Marples, and somewhere in that I found And Then There Were None. My first version was the 1945 black and white version. I still think it's the best. But before we get to that, though, a couple things to note. I want to point out that this is going to be relatively spoiler-free. I'm going to focus on the different locations of various productions, the cast, and some specifics for each one of interest. But even though the story's an old chestnut, it's still a great chestnut. Like, it's one of the best chestnuts.
I said, if you had some nuts on your chest, what would you have?
So while I might point out which one has a different ending, I'm not going to go into too much detail in either case. But there are usually two different endings, and we'll get to that in just a minute. My point is that I really want to share these stories with you guys, so rest assured I'm not going to spoil everything here.
What next?
The original title for her story is highly offensive, 10 Little
Nephews.
And we're going to look at the history of that in a moment. But put simply, I just don't want to say the word, so I'm not going to. It's not censorship or free speech or anything so hyperbolic and emotionally reactive. I just don't want to say the word. It's an ugly word. I don't want to hear it come out of my mouth. I assume that most people don't want to hear it come out of my mouth, so instead I'm going to get a little help from Snoop. 10 Little
Nephews.
You act like this is all one great big joke.
No, but the point of these videos is to have fun and share information about movies. I mean, I love the escapist element of movies because the real world is most often a meat grinder for the soul. But I just can't ignore the ugly parts either.
I wish it were that easy.
Honestly, I'm not even going to delve too deeply into this, if only out of recognition of this is not where my knowledge or expertise lies. People wanting to seriously learn about this stuff should not be getting that information from me, but pretending it isn't part of history would also be disingenuous, so I'm not going to do that either.
Gee, I can't tell you what a relief that is, Dick.
Alright, let's get started. All of these adaptations are based on Christie's novel originally titled 10 Little
Nephews.
Now, unlike Marple and the Poirot mysteries, And Then There Was None is a standalone work without a lead detective. There are entire genres of film that can trace back its lineage to Christie's novel. It's even the third best-selling book behind the Bible and Lord of the Rings.
And the thing's bigger than we thought.
It's an ingenious plot, so let's do a really quick overview, since all 15 adaptations we cover here are going to use this basic formula. Invitations for a weekend trip to an island retreat go out to 8 seemingly random guests. Each adaptation will feature a slightly different assortment of ladies and gents. They are met by 2 servants, 10 in all, and no host. Soon after arriving, they are all accused of murder by a voice on a speaker, and soon afterwards are being murdered one by one, each assuming that one amongst them must be the killer. There are statues of 10 children on the table, and as each guest dies, another of the figurines is found broken or missing. Each death also coincides with a line of an old poem usually found somewhere nearby on the wall, that of the original offensive title.
10 little Indians went out to dine. One choked his little self, and then there were 9.
9 little Indians staying up quite late. One ran away, and then there were 8.
8 little soldier boys traveling in Devon. One said he'd stay there, and then there were 7.
7 little roosters, one liked to draw dicks.
Aw, sweet! Final 6!
God damn it, Barb! Shut up! She's messing me up.
Five little Indian boys going in for law. Now one got enchantery and then there were 4.
You'll
人の小さな兵隊さん。魚釣り好きが海へ出て波にどんぶら3人になった。
Three little Indians walking in the zoo. A big bear hugged one.
Is that number 2?
Two little Indians sitting in the sun. One gets all frizzled up, and there was one.
One little Indian boy left all alone. Какой ужас. So he went and hanged himself, and then there were none.
Now, this poem is based on a minstrel song.
So what is it?
Minstrel shows were part of America's awkward transition from racist plantation to the super totally not racist utopia that some people want to pretend like it is. This is where blackface comes from, white actors performing songs and skits as black people for the express purpose of being degrading and racist. Minstrel shows were a way of culturally reinforcing racist tropes in a way that would last generations, and I actually think I can prove it. The song sounds horrible, right? It portrays black kids as being lazy, how they die, killing each other. The humor of the limerick comes from finding enjoyment in human cruelty, likely because you don't see the subject as human.
You're not laughing. You didn't find that funny?
Now, I think it's easy to just brush it off as a bygone part of history. I mean, the book was published almost 100 years ago, so the limerick would have had to have been written even earlier. I think it makes us feel more comfortable when it feels distant and removed from our own personal experience. It was something that happened a long time ago, right? Well, then I learned that there was a derivation of the song, or of the rhyme, was something that I remember from the schoolyard. So that would have been in the 1980s. One little, two little, three little Indians, etc., etc.
What the hell's that?
Yeah, sure, the lyrics are all cleaned up and there's no killing in that. It ends with 10 little Indian boys or whatever, but the direct lineage of that hateful poem found its way into my life at school as a child, and I didn't know, and that's absolutely insidious.
Hindsight's always 20/20. You did the best you could.
The book's title was also changed from
Nephews
to Indians. Now, of course, that's no longer acceptable either. Often people will change the name to 10 Little Soldiers in the story, or And Then There Was None, which is my personal favorite. Various different productions or printings use different names, making it a little bit more confusing, and that's one of the reasons why we're doing this today.
That's the general idea.
Next, the novel gets adapted into a play, and Christie realizes that the ending of the book might not work as well in front of an audience. Let's just say that Christie's original ending was rather bleak, and that it was changed by Christie herself for the stage play to make it more upbeat. And since it's a Christie ending, I still think it's very clever and satisfying, but going forward we're going to refer to these as the book ending and the Hollywood ending. And I know that I could say the stage ending, but I think Hollywood better conveys the tone shift and will be easier to remember for all of us.
That would have been so obvious a child could have guessed it.
This story was also adapted around the world in TV specials, in the UK in 1949, in Brazil in 63, in Germany in 69, etc. But they're a lot harder to come by, not usually producing physical media for them, and harder to source. So we're not going to be covering everything. And Then There Were None is also the great-great-grandmother of slashers. The entire idea of taking all of our meat people and putting them in one location, like a summer camp, and then hacking them to pieces one by one, takes that pressure cooker superstructure and simply guts all the intricate character and motivation work. I mean, or you could say it streamlines it, I guess. In And Then There Were None, characters suspect each other and try and reason out the mystery, while most slashers are lining up the bodies just to be cut down in inventive ways and entertaining us along the way. Look at it another way. A vigilante is rounding up bad people and locking them in some remote location and playing a game with them.
Do you want to play a game?
I mean, it's not as though Saw is an adaptation, but it is further proof of how cemented into our movie culture this story has become. And Then There Were None happens to be the first, or at least the best recognized for its contribution.
Take your pick.
The entire convention of the Agatha Christie 10 Little Indians plot clearly also has some heavy sway with Quentin Tarantino as well, as we can see in Hateful Eight, from the locked-in isolation location, the limited cast, The poisoning, the noose, the number in the title, and the heavy paranoia amongst all of the characters. But we're not going to cover every movie that got the benefits of Christie's story conventions. We're going to be focused on the intentional and directly influenced adaptations of her work. I mean, we could arguably throw in Hateful Eight. I would love to talk about Hateful Eight forever, but we're not going to.
It's so easy for you, isn't it? There's no feelings, no emotions.
Hey, I've got feelings. It's just that we got a lot to get through. There are more adaptations than any other Christie novel by a mile, like 25 that I could find, and we won't even cover them all here. But here are some touchstones for each that will come up time and time again on most productions, just points of interest to keep note of. First of all, we've got the location. It's almost always an exotic location and almost always guaranteed to change from movie to movie. The cast, not always, but often are filled with talent of note that add to the caliber of the feature. Then we have the statues, or figurines. They all tend to visualize their production in different ways, often reflecting the visual aesthetics of the movie. And then there's the chef or butler character. I might not always mention him or her, but the chef or butler is usually a standout character in many cases. You know, it doesn't really feel right to do an entire chapter on And Then There Were None, and we didn't even get to talk about any movies. I mean, on a channel that's supposed to be primarily about cinema.
Something is going to happen.
Well, how about this? There is a movie that we can talk about. It's not really an adaptation at all, but I think you'll understand why it's worth throwing in before we get started.
For tonight you are commanded to play an absorbing game. A game of death.
1934's The Ninth Guest was based on a play which was based on a book from 1930 called The Invisible Host.
The whole thing's got Hollywood stamped all over it. Why, those people can't even pay their gas bills without a lot of drama.
It's about 8 people being invited to a house for a party by an unknown host, and then being told over the radio that they are
commanded to play an absorbing game. A game of death.
We already did that one. The guests don't know their host and are given instructions over the radio.
You are now listening to the voice of your host. Ladies and gentlemen, you are promised the most original party ever given in this city. Tonight, my friends, we are to play an amusing game. A game of...
Don't say it's a game of death.
A game of wits.
Then, of course, they get paranoid, trying to figure out if one of them is the killer.
It's one of us. It must be.
Yeah, could be. Now, there's no proof that Christie ever saw the play or read the book, and all persons involved are now dead, so I guess it doesn't really matter, but in a very long list of adaptations and movies inspired by Agatha Christie's work, it would fit on the same shelf in my collection, probably just up there. Next chapter, we'll be starting with the first 3 decades of adaptations. I'd like you to click the like and follow button, but I can't make you.